Chapter 4. A Kind Heart. Kimber Kindheart stared contemplatively out the window of her father's two-story townhouse on a hill in the city of Necropire, the capital city of the land of Thalaria. She was short and thin, had brunette hair, light brown eyes, and small, delicate features. She huffed in boredom as she looked out upon the town, seeing the denizens walking about. It was getting late. Acolytes of the Church of the God-Feared were lighting the street lamps using magic. Kimber often watched them with interest, wondering how they did it. Her father, Camdar, worked in the reliquary of the God-Feared, a type of library where they kept magic tomes in the God-Feared Cathedral, which stood overlooking the city. Only those deemed worthy by Guldamir the God-Feared and his acolytes were allowed to read them. It was outlawed for anyone outside the church to practice magic.
Kimber,
Called Camdar as he entered her room.
Dinner's ready.
I could eat.
She replied as she turned to him from the window. He was a thin man with a soft and gentle nature, often with his head in a book, a trait that Kimber shared. Before they could sit down, there was a frantic knock on the door.
"Let me in! Let me in!"
cried Felix Flight. Camdar opened the door, and Felix came stumbling inside.
What's wrong this time, Felix? Did your tail chase you?
Camdar gestured.
Thalaria, Mr. Kindheart.
Felix huffed. Felix was an oddity. He had a protruding jaw and large triangular ears on top of his head. He looked like a house cat. His people, the Felanin, were mostly wiped out in the Cataclysm. Felix's parents were murdered by bigots when he was young, but he found a home with a kind-hearted engineer in Necropire who kept him around to keep the rats at bay, who grew fond of Felix and made him his apprentice.
I was making my way back from the workshop when I saw a pup get trampled by a carriage. I went over to help, but the acolytes raised the damn thing and it started chasing me down the street.
Felix whined.
Are you all right? Did it bite you?
Kimber asked him, concerned.
I'm fine, Kimber.
He smiled back at her, straightening up and dusting himself off.
The acolytes from the cathedral thought it was a sight to behold. I think one of them fell in the dirt from laughter.
Camdar grinned wide and put a hand on his shoulder.
That's because you run and scream like a girl.
Well, I'm sorry, but the risen just give me the creeps. Especially the ones that walk around when they should have been buried a long time ago. Have you seen the old man who lives in the outpost outside of town? The other day he was at the tavern where I was playing my lute, and his whole arm came off. Just fell on the floor in front of everyone. Then he didn't like my song, so he threw it at me.
Well, you probably deserved it. I've heard you play.
Felix huffed as Kimber spoke up.
Don't worry, Felix. I love your songs. What are you working on at the warehouse lately?
Kimber said, scratching behind his ears to comfort him. Felix purred softly.
Oh, something amazing. I can't give out the details just yet, but it's something that will put the flight known in the history books.
You didn't even take a break all day, did you? Why don't you join us for dinner, Felix?
That sounds amazing. Thank you, Kimber.
Felix replied, leaving Camdar to grunt and frown.
Is that okay, Father?
Kimber said, looking up to her father with puppy dog eyes.
Don't look at me like that. Your mother used to do that to me, and I could never say no. You remind me of her more every day.
See? I told you. Works every time.
Felix whispered to Kimber, and she smiled back at him playfully. The three of them sat down and talked about Felix's work and japed at his terrible music until the conversation turned.
So, what do they have you doing at the cathedral these days, Camdar?
Felix asked.
Lately, we've acquired manuscripts from the late Casta Pendragon.
Camdar said.
The Breaker of the World?
Felix replied, stunned.
The very same. I'd love to read them, but they are keeping them locked away. The judge are very protective of the use of magic.
Surely you must have peeked at a few tomes.
Felix asked. There was a short silence, and Kenda replied,
None. If the soldiers see me reading the tomes, they would incinerate me on the spot. The study of magic is reserved only for the acolytes of the church.
Kenda explained.
I would love to see the library, Father. Will you take me with you one day?
Kimber asked.
Tomorrow should be fine, but most of it is just manuals, novels, histories. We collect what was destroyed in the Cataclysm, but nothing overtly interesting. It's all strictly monitored, and anything that goes outside of church doctrine is usually burned.
Kenda explained.
Can I come with you?
Felix interrupted.
I need to look for a solution to an engineering issue I'm having. Maybe those old books could shed some light.
Camdar grunted again.
Okay, but if you get scared and scream like a girl, I'll stuff your gallop with scrolls and use you as a receptacle.
Camdar warned. Kimber showed Felix to the door as her father cleaned up the table. She looked mischievously at Felix.
I know that look. What are you planning?
Felix asked, raising an eyebrow.
I'm going to sneak a peek at those tomes.
Kimber said with a smile. Felix tilted his head to the side.
Are you insane? Do you want to be a pile of soot?
And you're going to help me.
Of course I am.
Felix rolled his eyes.
This isn't a good idea, but I can never change your mind when you look at me like that.
Felix said with a sigh.
See you tomorrow, Felix.
Kimber said as she shut the door. Kimber sat back at her window and watched as an acolyte lit another lamp with nothing more than his empty hand. Kimber smiled.
Tomorrow, I'll find out how they do it.
The next morning, Felix met them at the front door, and they headed for the cathedral. The streets of Neckarpie were full of people, most healthy, but there were some who looked so old that they must have been well over a century in age. The city streets were narrow and full of two-story townhouses with cobblestone roads. An acolyte of Guldamir stood guard at the entrance and checked Kimber and Felix as they entered. He laughed when he saw Felix.
If it isn't the screamer from yesterday, I just about pissed myself laughing as you ran down the street with that pup on your heels.
He said with a devilish grin. Felix gave a sarcastic laugh toward the acolyte and an unimpressed grin.
Good morning, Camdal. Lord Guldamir has requested you find maps of the area surrounding Dornshire and the Living Forest. Be sure you hand them to me by day's end.
A soldier said to Camdar as they entered the cathedral reliquary. To their left was a large two-story room lined with books and scrolls. A large staircase was either side leading up to a second floor with more books. At the back was a heavy locked door guarded by two soldiers in armor. A smoky raven sat perched on the railing above, looking down at them. Kimber looked at it, then looked to Camdar.
He's always watching, Kimber. Make sure you stay out of trouble.
Camdar warned. Kimber sat with Felix at a table piled with various books on mechanics and engineering.
I have work to do, so I'll check back with you two later. If you're after anything in particular, let me know, and I'll find it for you.
Camdar offered, but Kimber just gave her father a hug and slipped her hand unnoticed into his pocket.
Thanks, Daddy.
She said innocently. Camdar raised an eyebrow at her and grunted as he walked off. Kimber gave Felix a mischievous smile.
So the room at the back must be where they keep the magic tomes. We need to get into that room unnoticed.
How are you going to get in that room with those two guards standing there?
Felix asked her.
With these.
Kimber lifted a finger and a chain of keys dangled from it. Felix swatted her hand down.
Are you insane? You're going to get us all killed,
Felix said nervously.
That's where you come in. I need you to make a distraction.
Kimber pointed to the front door. The acolyte at the door was talking to a couple of soldiers wearing armor. Kimber snuck off and made her way behind a bookshelf.
I'm counting on you.
She whispered to Felix as he scratched his head with his foot. A few moments later, a big dead rat hit him in the face, thrown from the door. He caught it in his hand, confused as the acolyte raised his hands in prayer and began whispering something. The rat woke from its extended rest and bit Felix on the hand. He yelled and swatted the rat off the table. The acolyte and his soldier friend started laughing as the rat chased Felix, who was now screaming like a girl and running away frantically. The guards at the tome room door rushed to see what the commotion was, only to see Felix trip on a pile of books and fall down. The rat assailed him again, and he yowled louder. The raven on the railing had its eyes fixed on Felix as Kimber moved on the door. She found the right key on the second try and made her way inside, closing the door behind her. Inside, she found books assorted by color. To one side are books made of a kind of fleshy black leather. Some were blue hardcover books with latches on them. She unlatched one of the blue books and opened it. White trails of chaos magic flew out from the pages as she turned them. The title was Discerning the Nature of the Occult, Volume 1, by Casta Pendragon.
Found you.
She whispered as she tucked the book under her dress and moved to the exit. As she approached the door, she saw the raven flying back her way through the bars, so she ducked behind it. She thought she was caught, but scampered behind a bookshelf as the raven perched itself between the bars of the door, slowly looking over the room from one side to the other. The raven then flew across and perched itself on a table in clear side of the door, which was the only way out.
Well, I messed up. Now how am I going to get out of here?
She thought as she picked up a black fleshy book. She unlatched it. The title read, Guldamir's Necronomicon, Volume 1. The raven's eyes were immediately drawn to her location as a black miasma poured out from the book. She immediately shut it and left it sitting open on the floor next to the bookshelf. Kimber scampered around another bookshelf, staying out of sight of the raven, which flew itself over to a table looking down the aisle she was just in.
If that bird spots me, I'm done for.
Kimber thought, opening Pendragon's book. She began to read. On the page were diagrams and lexicons explaining how chaos magic is all around them, and when infused with life energy, it was given the life of its own and made real. Kimber continued reading and followed the instructions. She placed her fists together, knuckles almost interlocked, and focused on the space between. She felt her own life force flowing from one fist to the other and back again, until she saw thin white lines of chaos magic flowing between them. She then used her life force to pull on the chaos magic. The effort immediately left her exhausted.
Too much. A little less this time.
Kimber thought as she tried again, and to her surprise she could see more of the chaos magic. She pushed her fists together, interlocking them, and followed the directions of the spell in the tome. Her hands became less visible, as if disappearing under cloudy water. She increased the amount of life force used, and her body was covered in a foggy veil barely visible to the eye. The raven moved back to the door and scanned the room. It found nothing and exited back through the bars. With a sigh of relief, Kimber opened the door and moved out. She made it past a yowling Felix, who was now being accosted by Camdar for being too loud and stupid. Slipping the keys back into Camdar's pocket, she moved past the acolyte and guards at the front door. She ducked down a side alley out the front of the cathedral and released the spell. The world went black as she collapsed to the ground.
I hope you got what you are looking for, Miss Kindheart, because you certainly owe me for that. I've never been so humiliated, and your father is furious.
I got it.
She whispered groggily as she showed him the book, a huge smile of satisfaction on her face. They walked back to Kimber's townhouse, and Felix excused himself.
I think I need to take a bath.
Felix said with a shudder, still thinking about the dead rat crawling over him.
Thank you, Felix.
Kimber said as she gave Felix a kiss on the cheek. Felix's mouth and eyes went wide open as Kimber shut the door, giggling at him. Later that night after dinner, she waited for Camdo to go to sleep. Then she lit a candle and continued to read Pendragon's tome. After a few hours' study, the light of the candle flame grew brighter as the words on the page began to rearrange themselves before her eyes. They began to form into a sentence.
Pendragon lives.
Kinder said the words sleepily, then said them again.
Pendragon lives?
Her eyes widened as the words rearranged again and formed a new sentence.
Locked away.
She read, and again they rearranged.
Not news?
The words returned to normal, and Kimber grabbed her coat. She hurried downstairs and out the door. On the roof of her house sat a smoky raven with golden eyes. It pursued her unnoticed into the black of the night. Kimber arrived at Felix's house and knocked on the door. The raven perched on a rooftop close by as he answered wearily, wearing a pointed pajama hat over one long ear and holding a candle, his eyes barely open. He perked up when he realized it was Kimber at the door.
Pendragon is alive.
She said as she pushed her way past.
What?
Felix said sleepily.
Come in, why don't you?
Felix said as he fixed to get them both some tea. Kimber recounted what happened with the tome in her room.
Pendragon died 500 years ago after messing with powers he couldn't control, and took most of the world with him. He was a power-hungry dark wizard,
Felix stated.
That's what the Church of the God-Feared tells us. But what if he never died? What if Pendragon was sealed away? What about all the stories of Pendragon before the Cataclysm? He was thought of as a hero of the people, a warrior against the powers of chaos. That's why the Church has been collecting and destroying histories before the Cataclysm.
Kimber retorted.
Even if the book tells the truth and Pendragon is alive, Mount Muse was destroyed during the Cataclysm. It's nothing more than a crater now, so he can't be located there. And besides, why would you want to find a man who destroyed the world?
Kimber looked at him sadly.
Because the Church of the God-Feared took my mother. They said she had chaos sickness, so Father took her to the cathedral to see Guldamir. She never came home. I think something happened to her, but I was very young. I also think it's why my father chose to work for them. He's still trying to find out the truth of what happened. I think Pendragon can help me find the truth, and the first place to look will be the crater where Mount Muse used to stand.
Kimber said.
You've lost your marbles. There are nightmare creatures out there. You'll be dead before you even get close.
Felix stammered.
There are less monsters out during the day, so that's when we'll go.
We?
Of course. You wouldn't make a hapless young woman do this alone, would you?
Kimber looked at him with big doe eyes, and Felix stood there unimpressed.
How dare you use my own tricks against me? But of course, I will help you,
he said in as manly a tone as he could muster. Kimber smiled at him.
Besides, I've got this.
She held up Pendragon's tome. The raven outside Felix's house exploded into black smoke, and the Lich Guldamir stood from his throne in the cathedral of the God-Feared. He floated down the stairs and walked down a corridor, running his smoky, skeletal hand over each door as he passed. 7 acolytes acknowledged his presence and began to follow him downstairs without a word spoken. They convened at the main doors, and Guldamir addressed them in a wicked, raspy voice.
The kind-hearted girl has stolen something valuable from us. Bring her to me alive.
Raising a hand, black smoke gathered around it, forming into a raven. It flew ahead of the acolytes as they bowed and left, lined up in 2 rows of marching formation. They made their way down the street, following the raven's lead. The lights dimmed as they passed. People stumbled and ran from their presence as they headed downtown to Felix's residence. Camdar saw the lights dimming from his bed as they passed. He looked out the window to see the acolytes marching. He took 3 candles and put them together to make a larger flame to compensate for the dimming light. He then walked down the hall to check on Kimber. He knocked on the door and waited. There was no answer. He cracked the door to peek inside, only to find her bed empty.
Oh no. No, no, no!
Camdar said as he ran down the hall. His mind raced to all the possibilities which panicked him further. Camdar already lost his wife. He couldn't lose his only daughter. Not to them. Not again. He changed into his robe and grabbed a notebook from under the floorboards in his room, then rushed out the door in the direction of the acolytes. The acolytes arrived in front of Felix's house and placed their hands together as if in prayer. Black miasma poured from them as they extended a hand towards the house. Flames appeared in their palms. They came together in a semicircle and extended the fire in their hands toward the center. They conjured into a fireball the size of a cannonball. Felix set Kimber up on a pallet bed on the floor.
"See you in the morning, Miss Kindheart,"
he said tenderly. She blew him a kiss, and he smiled.
Good night, Felix.
Kimber said, looking at him lovingly. But as Felix turned to leave, he went to blow out a candle near the door. As he brought his lips to it, it grew very dim, as if the darkness was pushing in around it.
"That's odd,"
Felix said, looking puzzled. Kimber looked up at the light, and her eyes grew wide with fear. The front door of the house exploded into pieces of flying wood and fire. Felix had blown into the room, then jumped on top of Kimber to shield her from any falling debris with his body. As the dust settled, the acolyte stepped through the door. Felix held Kimber to her feet, and they both ran for the back door. As they moved, Felix opened a cupboard and pulled on a rope.
"I hope this still works,"
he said as a trapdoor opened in the front room of the house, and hundreds of little furry worms fell out from the ceiling, covering 2 acolytes as they began to laugh hysterically. Overwhelmed by tickling creatures, they hit the floor giggling. Another acolyte raised a hand and purged the room with fire, burning his colleagues, the worms, and the house as Kimber and Felix rushed outside into a narrow alley. Felix opened a small shed and pulled out a small bag and a bicycle with a strange contraption attached to it. He got on and helped Kimber onto his lap. 3 acolytes appeared in the alley as Felix pulled out a flint from his pack. He struck it, and a whip began to spark as the acolytes each raised a hand. Fire sparked to life in their palms. The whip burned into the contraption and exploded. Sparks flew everywhere as a piston attached to the rear wheel spun wildly. It sped off down the alleyway toward the acolytes as the acolytes blasted small fireballs toward them. One connected with the front wheel and bent the wheel frames the bicycle rammed into them with tremendous speed, knocking them flat. Felix maneuvered the bicycle as they skidded around the corner and onto the street. 2 acolytes saw them as they sped off. The bicycle wobbled uncontrollably on the broken wheel as they made pace. Felix couldn't control the damaged bike, and they crashed into a wall, sending them hurtling over it, rolling onto the pavement, bruised and grazed.
What the hell, Felix?
Kimber yelled at him.
"I'm sorry, Miss Kindheart. It still needs some work,"
Felix said sheepishly. They heard footsteps of the acolytes running down the street after them, got to their feet. The acolytes started firing fireballs from the wall, and they ducked into an alleyway between 2 shops. They rushed down the alley only to find it ended abruptly. They turned to leave, but the 2 acolytes stood to block the exit.
"Miss Kindheart, Mr. Flight, you're coming with us. Lord Guldenir wishes an audience with you,"
one of them said with a tone of authority. Felix pulled a small metal cylinder up from his pack with 2 buttons on each side. He squeezed them, and the cylinder sprang out into a star. The acolytes placed their hands together, and black miasma extended upward from them. It joined together, then hit the ground in front of them. It formed an inky, dark hole devoid of light. A long-limbed, lanky humanoid creature with hollow black holes for eyes clambered out of it.
It's a fake.
Kimber whispered, horrified, backing away. The acolytes backed away from it and out of the alleyway. The creature screamed a horrifying cry and advanced on them on all fours. Long front arms like an extra long pair of legs. Felix growled, hair standing on end.
I have to protect her,
He thought, then moved to intercept it.
Be careful, Felix.
Kimber shouted. Icy fear gripped them both as the creature came close. Its foul breath stank of death. Felix stabbed at it with his staff, but he grabbed it with an effortless reflex and pulled it out of his grasp. It threw the staff to the ground in one quick movement and continued to advance on Felix. Felix began to whimper as he stepped back, not able to match the nightmare creature's strength. The creature grabbed him, lifting him 8 feet up against the wall with one lanky arm. Its mouth opened wide, revealing a dark void within as it began to suck the very life force from Felix's body. Felix's face became gaunt as his life was being stripped away. Kimber grabbed Pendragon's tome and started flicking through the pages, frantically trying to find a spell she could use to stop the creature. A sudden burst of wind blew through the alley, and they heard 2 loud cries of pain as both of the acolytes hit the wall of the alleyway. There stood Camdar, notebook in hand, dust kicking up around him. Kimber's mouth opened agape. She couldn't believe what she saw.
Father?
She asked, confused. Never in her wildest dreams would she have thought her timid father could be a wizard. Camdar slammed his fists together, then extended both arms toward the nightmare creature. Light began to glow on his palms and started to engulf the entire alleyway in a blinding array of light. The creature let out a screech, dropping Felix to the ground, then climbed the wall of the building to escape over the roof.
Are you all right, Felix?
Camdar asked, helping him to his feet.
I'm fine, sir. Thank you. You saved my life.
Felix said.
No, thank you, Felix. You saved my daughter.
He regarded Felix with a newfound respect as he patted the dust from his tailcoat. Then he regarded Kimber.
I'll be taking that.
Camdar said as he snatched the tome from Kimber.
Do you know what you've done? I told you he sees everything, and you completely ignored me.
Camdar scolded.
I'm sorry, Father. Why didn't you tell me you know magic?
Kimber said, head down, unable to look him in the eye.
I've been keeping notes from Pendragon's tomes for years, every time I've had a chance. But Guldamir and his minions keep such a close eye on me, I've hardly had time. I still don't know what happened to your mother, but I'm convinced Guldamir was responsible.
Pendragon is alive, Father.
Kimber said as she looked up at him.
That's impossible, Kimber. It's been 500 years since Pendragon broke the world. He's long gone. Stop this charade. We are going to the church to give this back and beg for forgiveness.
Camdar said, grabbing Kimber's hand, and turned to leave.
It was in his book. It told me. He's imprisoned at Mount News, and besides, Guldamir and his ilk have been around since the Cataclysm, so why not Pendragon also?
Kimber pleaded to him, pulling back. Camdar stopped in his tracks.
If anyone would know what happened to my mother, it would be a man like Pendragon.
She started to sob. Felix saw she was upset and perked up.
Well, it's not like we have much of a choice now anyway. The church won't let us go now that they know about us borrowing their precious book.
He pointed to the end of the alleyway. The acolytes were gone. Across the street, a raven was perched above the alleyway, watching intently. Felix fetched them some hooded coats to hide their faces as they made their way to the city gate, crouching behind a peddler's cart. The guard at the gate was talking to a merchant.
No one is permitted to enter or leave at this time.
How are we going to get out?
We can use the tome.
Camdar took out the tome reading from one of the passages on the manipulation of light and water molecules. They placed their fists together, and a cloud of blurry water made them almost completely invisible, like looking into a dirty water trough.
Well, that's all good for you. But what about me?
Felix asked.
Stay in the city. Lay low for a while, and we'll be back in a day or two.
Kimber said, stroking Felix's furry face.
Okay. Take my pack, Miss Kiteheart. There are some supplies in there for the road.
Felix responded with a sigh as the two headed to the guard door next to the main gate. As a guard unlocked it and walked out, they slipped in behind before it closed, then headed out into the blasted lands beyond the city. It was dusty and devoid of life. Ruins from an age before the Cataclysm dotted the landscape, and the howls, growls, and the maniacal laughter of nightmare creatures echoed out over it. Not long after they left the gate, Kimber dropped to her knee, exhausted from holding up the veil of the cloaking spell. Camdar released it as well, panting from the effort as they faded back into view.
We'll head east, toward the crater of Mount Muse. We'll look around for any traces of low-cost Pendragon bear.
They headed off as day broke over the horizon, a raven following not far behind. They traveled, sticking to the light in the day, before coming to the crater. It was deep and shrouded in a dense black fog. In the middle, they could faintly make out a waterfall from a rocky ledge. They headed down the chasm and into the fog. The rocky ledge was narrow and treacherous. As Kimber stepped, it crumbled away. It was hard to see, and the sound of howls and scurrying creatures could be heard nearby. Kimber shuddered. This was no place for living things.
It's no wonder no one ever comes here. It's a home for nightmare creatures.
Camdar said, regretting his decision.
Father, I think we should remain unseen.
Kimber said nervously, grabbing Camdar by the hand. The two placed their fists together and faded from sight. They made their way to the bottom of the cliff face, then started toward the center of the crater. They walked along a path with footsteps in the muddy ground that looked like it had been regularly used. They came to a rocky spire that leaned over a pool with an impossible waterfall flowing in reverse. The path took them behind the waterfall and into a cave behind. It was warm inside, almost inviting, with green vines growing just outside. Inside, they found a large black obsidian stone door. It had gold runes down the center and was covered in a thick black miasma. Looking up, they saw a raven perched above, wings spread outward, draping black miasma over the door.
This has to be the place.
Guldamir wouldn't be keeping watch here for nothing.
Camdar replied. He sat on a stone in front of the door, pulling out some food and a flint and steel to start a fire and cook their meal. Kimber walked back out to fetch some of the deadwood from outside for kindling. She bent down to pick up a rotten log when she thought she heard a wailing sound from out in the dark fog and looked up. She looked around, but couldn't see anything. She headed back in quickly and helped her father get a campfire started.
So, how do you think we get inside?
It looks to be sealed magically. My guess is we have to use magic to open it. It's no wonder Guldamir didn't want people knowing how to cast magic. He didn't want people like us being able to open this door.
Kimber opened the tome and flipped through the pages. The words began to change.
Father, come look!
Camdar rushed over and looked at it astonished as the words formed into a sentence. It said, "Kill the bird." Camdar slammed his fists together. He pulled on his life force as he extended his arms out toward the bird. The wind picked up around him and a powerful gust of wind blasted out toward the raven. It flooded its wings and blew the tyrant back toward them, knocking them down next to the sparking fire. The wind picked up the embers and blew them around the cave and back toward the bird. It squawked wildly as an ember singed at its wing.
Flit through that book and see if you can find any information on fire.
Camdar asked Kimber. She turned through the pages until she found a page containing information on how to manipulate combustible gases in the air and condense heat. Slamming her fists together, she pulled upon her life force and extended a hand toward the campfire. Up jumped a bit of fire resting in her palm. It burned through her life force pool quickly like paper to a flame. She realized the amount of raw power and how exhausting it would be to create a fireball the size of the one that blew up Felix's front door.
I'll help,
Camdar said. They both interlocked their knuckles and pulled their life forks together. They reached a palm outstretched toward the fire. The flames jumped into their palms, and as they both increased their output, Camdar grunted from the effort and Kimber panted wildly. They pushed their palms next to each other and the fire exploded from a small flame into a ball of fire.
Now, Kimba, we can take it down.
Camdar shouted as they aimed up at the bird and let the fireball go. It shot out like a cannonball and hit the bird directly. It exploded into black smoke with an echoing squawk, disintegrating into feathers which then smoked away into nothingness. The cave began to rumble and shake as the black miasma which fell over the door began to dissipate. They heard a wailing from outside the cave as ghostly robed creatures flew in carrying long scythes. They flew toward Kimber and Camdar. The golden runes on the obsidian door glowed brightly, then shattered like glass, and a line of golden light appeared at the join of the door.
Kimba, those nightmare creatures are wraiths. They're harvesters of souls.
Camdar shouted as the door began to open. A bright light shot out from within, lighting the cave. The creatures were eviscerated by the light as Kimba and Camdar were engulfed by it. The light shot out of the cave in a beam of iridescent brilliance, destroying a small army of nightmare creatures waiting outside. Kimba shielded her eyes with her hand and dared not to look beyond it lest she go blind. The light faded, and her vision cleared. Standing there in the doorway was Lord Casta Pendragon, looking old, grey, agitated, and disheveled. "Is that you, Golden Heir? Did you enjoy my welcoming gift, you coward?" Lor said in an old-timey voice. Kimba looked at Camdar, then back to Pendragon.
I'm Kimber Kindheart, and this is my father Camdar. We found your tome.
Pendragon raised a bushy grey eyebrow and looked them over. It seems some of my magic still exists in this world. Would you mind helping an old man out of these chains?